On the day my father stood in front of 200 people and told them his greatest accomplishment was my brother, I was sitting 3 tables away, holding a glass of champagne I couldn't afford, wearing a dress I'd borrowed from my coworker, smiling so nobody would see me breaking apart. That was June 2023. By October, I owned 51% of everything he'd spent his life building. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because if I start there, you won't understand what it cost me to get there. You won't understand the 23 years that came before that boardroom. The Christmas dinners where my name was the punchline. The school reports that got framed on one wall and quietly recycled on another. The small, daily erasures that nobody outside our house would ever see. My name is Cora Voss. I'm 31 years old. And for most of my life, I was the dumb one. Not the troubled one. Not the misunderstood one. Those descriptions at least carry some drama, some romance. No. I was just the dumb one. The one who took longer. The one who needed things explained twice, 3 times 4. The one who sat at the kitchen table until 10 at night struggling through problems that my brother Devin finished before dinner. The one my father looked at with that specific expression. Not cruelty, exactly. Something worse. Resignation. And I want to be honest with you right now, before we go any further, because this story isn't a revenge fantasy. It's not a highlight reel. It's real, which means it's messy and it hurts, and the ending isn't a neat bow. But there is an ending. And when I tell you what was waiting for me inside a manila envelope at my uncle's retirement party, you're going to understand why my grandmother spent the last 4 years of her life making sure I found it. She was watching the whole time. I just didn't know. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning, the ordinary one. Because that's where the real story lives. The Voss family. Midwest, not Manhattan, but the same architecture of ambition. My grandfather, Werner Voss, had started Voss Industrial Supply in 1971 out of a 2-car garage in Columbus, Ohio. By the time he died in 2009, the company supplied hardware, equipment, and industrial materials to construction firms across 11 states. Valued, at that point, at somewhere around $30 million. My father, Randall, inherited it. His brother, my uncle Philip, took a buyout. And Randall spent the next 14 years growing it, acquiring 2 smaller competitors, expanding into commercial HVAC, and landing a contract with a regional hospital system that nearly doubled the company's revenue. By 2023, Voss Industrial Supply was worth approximately $92 million. My brother Devin, 3 years older than me, was being groomed to take it over. And I was being groomed for something they never explicitly said out loud but communicated in every other possible way. I was being groomed to accept less. I need you to understand what my childhood actually looked like, because I think sometimes people hear the dumb one, and they imagine dramatic abuse, screaming, obvious cruelty. That wasn't it. My parents weren't monsters. They were something more complicated than that. They were people who loved their idea of a family more than they loved the actual family in front of them. My father was a self-made man by his own definition, which meant he measured everything by visible performance. Grades. Test scores. Awards. The kind of achievements you could put in a frame and hang on the wall of your office to show clients. Devin delivered. Devin was the honor roll, the varsity captain, the scholarship to Michigan. Devin was the frame on the wall. I had ADHD. Diagnosed at 9. Couldn't sit still. Couldn't focus on things that didn't interest me, which, in a traditional classroom, meant almost everything. My mind worked in hyperlinks, not in straight lines. I'd be solving one problem and suddenly see a connection to something completely unrelated and chase it for an hour before remembering what I'd started. My teachers called it distraction. My father called it laziness. My mother, Patricia, called it Cora being Cora in a tone that managed to be both affectionate and deeply dismissive at the same time. The intervention I needed at 9 was a different learning environment. An understanding that my brain was wired differently, not broken. What I got instead was a tutor who drilled flashcards at me for 3 hours every Saturday. A pediatrician who kept adjusting my medication until I was calm enough to sit still in school, and a family that quietly, steadily concluded I simply wasn't built for the kind of success they valued. They weren't wrong that I was different. They were catastrophically wrong about what that difference meant. But I didn't know that yet. There's a memory I've carried since I was 11 years old. A Tuesday in November. Parent-teacher conferences. My mother had taken Devin first, come out beaming. Devin's teacher had apparently said something about exceptional analytical gifts. Then it was my turn. I waited in the hallway on a plastic chair, swinging my feet because they didn't reach the floor. My mother came out of that conference 12 minutes later. I counted, because I'd noticed Devin's had lasted 22. She smiled at me, but it was the smile she used when she was managing a situation. "Mrs. Hartfield says you're a joy to have in class," she said. Even at 11, I understood what that meant. It meant I was sweet. It meant I was kind. It meant I didn't make trouble. It was the thing teachers said when they couldn't find anything academically impressive to report. A joy to have in class. The consolation prize for the girl who would never be exceptional. My grandmother Ida was picking us up that day. Ida Voss, my father's mother, 71 years old, small and sharp, and absolutely nothing like the gentle grandmother you'd imagine from a Hallmark movie. She had opinions. She expressed them directly. She ran her household like a board meeting, with an agenda and an expected outcome. She was waiting by the car when we came out. My mother gave her a summary of the conferences on the short walk across the parking lot. Devin's first, effusive. Mine, brief. A joy to have in class. Ida didn't say anything until we were in the car. Then she looked at me in the rearview mirror and she said, "Cora, you noticed the construction on 5th Street this morning, didn't you? You pointed out that the drainage was wrong." I had. We'd driven past a building site and I'd said something about how the water would pool against the foundation if they didn't angle it differently. I'd seen it on some YouTube video about construction mistakes. I didn't even remember saying it. "Yeah," I said. "That," Ida said, eyes back on the road, "is called pattern recognition. Your father has never had it. Devin doesn't have it. I have it. And I built Werner's first 3 contracts on it." She didn't say anything else about it. My mother changed the subject. I filed it away in the part of my brain where I kept things I didn't fully understand yet. I would understand eventually. But not before 20 more years of being the one they forgot to believe in. I'm going to fast forward through the middle years. Not because they don't matter, but because I think you already know what they looked like. The high school years where Devin's awards filled the refrigerator door and mine didn't make it past the counter. The college years where Devin went to Michigan on a partial scholarship and I went to Ohio State, the backup plan school, the school my father described to his colleagues as a solid choice for her. Ohio State was objectively a great university. But that's not the point. The point is the way he said it. Solid choice for her. Like he'd set the ceiling low so the disappointment wouldn't be too far to fall. I studied business, mostly because I didn't know what else to study, and spent 4 years feeling like I was running a race in shoes that didn't fit. My grades were fine, not exceptional, and I graduated in 2014 with a degree and no particular direction. My father got me an entry-level job at Voss Industrial Supply. Accounts payable clerk. $41,000 a year. He presented it as a kindness, as keeping me in the family orbit, as giving me a chance to learn the business from the ground up. Devin started as assistant director of operations. Salary undisclosed, but I heard $82,000 from someone in HR who'd had one too many drinks at the holiday party. I told myself it was fair. Devin had the credentials. Devin had the track record. Devin had a plan. I told myself a lot of things to keep from noticing the pattern. But the pattern was always there. And the person who saw it most clearly wasn't in the building. My grandmother Ida came to the Voss offices once a month, every month, from the day I started until the day she got too sick to make the drive. She'd walk through the floor, talk to the staff, look at things with those sharp, quiet eyes, and then have lunch with whoever was around. She always found me. At first, I thought it was pity. The grandmother making sure the overlooked granddaughter didn't feel forgotten. But as months turned into years, I started to notice something. She wasn't making small talk at those lunches. She was asking me specific questions. What did you notice this week? What didn't make sense to you? What would you do differently? And I answered her honestly, because she was the only person in my family who seemed to actually want to know. In the spring of 2016, I told her I'd noticed that our 3 biggest clients in the HVAC division had all quietly reduced their order frequencies over the past 8 months. Nobody had flagged it. The numbers were still technically up because we'd brought in 2 new clients, but the base was eroding. I'd mapped it out on a spreadsheet that I kept on my personal laptop because I didn't have access to the actual analytics software. Ida set down her fork. "Have you told your father?" I laughed, not bitterly, just instinctively. He doesn't really ask my opinion on operational stuff. She looked at me for a long moment. "Show me the spreadsheet." I did. She studied it for 11 minutes, not saying a word. Then she folded her hands on the table and said, "Cora, your father is very good at building. He is not good at watching. Those are different skills. You have the second one." She paused. Then, almost to herself, "Werner had it too." She changed the subject after that. She always changed the subject before I could ask the question I wanted to ask. I didn't understand why then. I would later. And when I did, everything rearranged itself into a shape I should have recognized years before. Let me tell you about the night that changed the direction of everything. Not the boardroom, not the envelope, not the inheritance. The night that came before all of it, when I finally understood what I'd actually been dealing with all along. It was Thanksgiving 2021. My parents' house, the colonial in Bexley that my father had bought after his first major acquisition. 22 family members around two pushed-together tables. The kitchen smelled like my mother's roast, and the particular tension that only exists in families performing normalcy over fault lines. Devin had recently been promoted to VP of Operations. My father made the announcement before the food was even served, pulling Devin to his feet and leading the room in applause while Devin did the modest, reluctant smile he'd been practicing since childhood. I was eating sweet potato casserole and doing the math on how long before I could politely leave. Then Devin's wife, Kelsey, said the thing that cracked something open in me permanently. "Cora, you've been at the company now, what, 7 years?" 8? 7, I said. "And you're still in accounts." Not unkind. Genuinely curious, which was somehow worse. "I always thought you'd have moved up by now." The table was briefly, horribly quiet. My father cleared his throat. "Cora has found a good niche for herself." He said it warmly. He believed it was a kindness. My mother smiled her managing smile. "Cora's always been more of a support person. It suits her. A support person." I looked around the table. 22 people, some of whom were nodding slightly, some of whom were finding the contents of their plates very interesting. And I realized, with the clarity that sometimes arrives on the back of humiliation, that every single person at that table had accepted my parents' version of me. Not out of cruelty. Just because nobody had ever offered them a different one. Nobody except Ida. She was 81 by then, the last year she could still make the drive to Bexley herself. She was sitting at the corner of the table nearest the kitchen door, and she was watching me. Not with pity. With something that looked from certain angles, almost like a plan. "Cora," she said, into the quiet that was still vibrating with my mother's support person. "Come help me with the pie." I followed her into the kitchen. She handed me a serving knife I didn't need. Then she turned to me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. "I'm not going to be around much longer," she said. "Grandma. Don't. Let me finish." She rested one hand on the counter. "I have made provisions. You'll find out what they are when the time comes. But I need you to make me a promise right now." I waited. "When you find out, don't wait. Don't second guess. Don't talk yourself out of it because you're worried about how it will look." Her eyes held mine. "Your father has mistaken patience for weakness in you for 30 years. You have let him because you were waiting for him to change his mind. He won't. That's not who he is." She straightened up and picked up the pie like the conversation hadn't happened. "Grandma, what provisions? What are you talking about?" "Pie time," she said, and carried it out of the kitchen. I stood alone in that kitchen for 90 seconds. Then I went back to the table and ate pie and smiled and said goodbye at 10 o'clock and drove home with the windows down in November and thought about what she'd said until I pulled into my parking lot and realized I'd been gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't know I wouldn't have to wait very long. Ida Voss died in March 2022. Congestive heart failure. She went quickly, which everyone said was a blessing and which I think she would have arranged on purpose if she could have. She was not a woman who liked prolonged processes. I was at her bedside, which I want to say because it matters to the story. My father was there. Devin was there. My mother was there. 5 of us in that small, overwarm hospital room, the monitors beeping in the irregular rhythm that I'd learned to read in the 2 weeks I'd been visiting every day. She died at 4:17 in the morning. My father wept. Genuinely, openly. Whatever else I might say about Randall Voss, he loved his mother. He just never figured out that loving her meant loving what she saw in me. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect. Visitation, service, reception at the country club my grandparents had joined in 1988. The right people saying the right things about a remarkable woman. My father spoke. Devon spoke. 3 colleagues of my grandfather from the early company days spoke. Nobody asked me to speak. I hadn't expected them to. But I noticed, at the reception, that Ida's personal attorney, a compact, methodical man named Arthur Selig, watched me from across the room with the same specific quality of attention that Ida used to watch me with. Present. Waiting. Measuring something only he could see. He caught my eye once and gave a small, deliberate nod. At the time I told myself it meant nothing. At the time I was wrong about a lot of things. The months after Ida's death settled into an uncomfortable new normal. My father threw himself into the company with the focused grief of a man who processes loss through work. Devon was elevated again, now senior VP, and publicly announced as the heir apparent to the CEO position when my father eventually stepped back. That announcement came at a company-wide town hall in September 2022. My father stood at the podium and talked about legacy and leadership and the next generation of Voss values. He talked about Devon's analytical mind, his strategic instincts, his proven track record. I was in the 3rd row of folding chairs, 3 feet away from someone whose name my father had been announcing to rooms his entire adult life. Afterward, my colleague Sandra, who had worked in accounts payable alongside me for 4 years and was the closest thing I had to a friend in that building, touched my arm. "Are you okay?" "Fine," I said. "Why wouldn't I be?" She just looked at me with the expression people use when they don't want to say the thing they're actually thinking. That night I went home and sat in my apartment and did something I'd been doing increasingly since Ida died. I thought about what she'd told me in that kitchen. Provisions. Don't wait. Don't second guess. I'd been waiting 16 months. Nothing had happened. No letter, no call, no mysterious envelope. Maybe she'd simply meant that she'd made sure I was comfortable, left me some money, a small inheritance designed to cushion whatever future I was supposed to build for myself. Maybe the provisions were practical, and I'd been turning them into something they weren't because I needed to believe someone had planned for me. But I couldn't shake Arthur Selig's nod. I pulled up Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. I pulled up Arthur Selig, attorney at law. I looked at his firm's website. 40-year practice, specializing in estate planning and trust administration. I found his email address. I started typing, deleted it, started again, deleted it again. Finally I wrote, "My name is Cora Voss. I'm Ida Voss's granddaughter. You looked at me at the funeral in a way that made me wonder if there was something I should know. I'm sorry if I'm wrong about that. But if I'm not, could you let me know?" I sent it before I could stop myself. His reply arrived 11 minutes later, as if he'd been waiting. "Miss Voss, I was wondering when you'd reach out. I think it's time we talked. Are you available Thursday?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed yes. And I thought about my grandmother watching me from the corner of the Thanksgiving table, handing me a pie knife I didn't need, saying the word provisions in a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and secrets. She hadn't been giving me comfort that night. She'd been handing me a box. If this story is hitting close to home right now, if you've ever sat in a room where someone announced your sibling's future and assumed yours was already settled, I want you to type the word "seen" in the comments. Because the most important part of what comes next isn't the money. It's the moment I realized I'd never actually been invisible. I'd just been seen by the wrong people. Keep watching, because what Arthur Selig told me in that conference room on Thursday changed everything I thought I knew about my family. The office of Selig and Associates was in a building in downtown Columbus that smelled like old paper and central heating. The kind of building that belongs to attorneys who've been practicing so long they've become part of the architecture. Arthur Selig was already standing when I was shown in. He was shorter than I remembered from the funeral, neatly dressed, with the careful stillness of someone who measured every word before it left his mouth. "Miss Voss, thank you for coming." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. I sat. He sat. Between us, a manila folder, thick, closed, resting on the desk like something with its own gravity. "I was Ida Voss's attorney for 27 years, he said. "She was one of the most precise clients I've ever worked with. Everything she asked me to do, she asked with a specific timing in mind. And the timing is now? The timing is now?" He opened the folder. Inside, several pages of dense legal text, a notarized signature at the bottom, a date I couldn't read from my angle. "Your grandmother executed this document in August of 2019, he said. At that time, she also made me aware of a wooden box she was leaving in your possession. He looked up. Did she give you a box? I went very still. Because yes, she had. In 2019, the last year she could still drive to Columbus without my uncle accompanying her, she'd come to my apartment unannounced on a Sunday afternoon with a bottle of wine, and that particular energy she carried when she was settling something in her mind. We'd talked for 3 hours. About the company. About my father, about a period in the late 1980s when she'd had to quietly intervene in a business decision my grandfather was making that would have cost them everything. Before she left, she'd pressed a small lockbox into my hands. Metal, combination lock, no indication of what was inside. The combination, she'd said, is the year I started Werner's first contract. I didn't know that year. I'd had to look it up. 1974. I dialed it in, the box had opened, and inside I'd found a USB drive and a sealed envelope with my name written in her handwriting. She'd told me to wait. She'd told me I would know when. The USB and the sealed envelope had been sitting in my dresser drawer for 4 years. There's a box, I said carefully. Arthur Selig nodded. I'd suggest you open it before we continue. Do you have it with you? I did. I'd brought it on instinct, that particular combination of dread and knowing that had been building since I'd sent that email. I pulled it from my bag, placed it on the desk, spun the combination to 1974. The envelope first. My grandmother's handwriting on heavy cream paper, dated October 2019. I read it the way she'd taught me to read everything that mattered, slowly, completely, without skipping ahead. My dearest Cora. If you're reading this, Arthur has done his job, and you've finally trusted yourself enough to reach out. That took longer than I expected, which tells me they did more damage than I feared. I'm sorry for that. I should have acted sooner. Here is what I need you to know. In 2019, your father proposed a resolution to the Voss Industries Advisory Board, which I still sit on as founding shareholder, to reclassify my ownership shares as non-voting. His rationale, formally submitted, was that I was no longer capable of understanding modern business operations. The resolution failed. 2 members voted with me. Your father has not forgiven them. I recorded that meeting. The recording is on the USB. Keep it safe. More importantly, I need you to understand why I'm doing what I'm about to do. Not because you are better than Devin. You are different from Devin, which is something your father has never been able to distinguish. Devin will run the company adequately. He will make safe decisions and produce reasonable returns and never see the things you see. You see the water pooling against the foundation before anyone else knows there's a problem. That is not a small skill, Cora. That is the skill that built this company. I love your brother. I love your father. But I love you in the particular way I love the things worth protecting. And I have protected you the only way I knew how. All my love, Grandma Ida. I looked up from the letter. Arthur Selig was watching me with that same measured attention. The will, I said. He turned the folder toward me. I, Ida Werner Voss, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents and declare this to be my last will and testament. My eyes moved to the paragraph in the middle of the second page. To my granddaughter, Cora Marie Voss, I bequeath my entire holding of 51% of Voss Industrial Supply's founding shares, along with all associated voting rights, effective upon my death. The room was perfectly quiet. 51%. Founding shares. Majority. The same structure that had given my grandfather control of the company from its first day. The same shares my father had tried to reclassify as non-voting in 2019 because he'd known, then, that whoever held them held everything. He'd been trying to defuse a bomb he didn't know I was going to detonate. Is this legal? My voice came out steadier than I expected. It is. Ohio probate law is clear. This will, dated August 2019, supersedes the 2016 document your family was given after your grandmother's death. Arthur's voice was even professional. Your father was informed of the 2016 will at that time. He was not informed this one existed. He thought he knew what she left. He thought he knew. Arthur paused carefully. He was wrong. I sat with that for a moment. My grandmother had watched her son try to strip her of her power. Had documented it. Had then quietly moved her most valuable asset out of his reach and into mine, and had sat across from me at Thanksgiving tables and Christmas dinners for 3 more years, watching him perform his certainty about who I was and who I wasn't, knowing that she'd already written a different ending. She hadn't changed the story. She'd just hidden the last page until I was ready to read it. There is a condition, Arthur said. There is always a condition with Ida Voss. To activate the bequest, I had to formally invoke majority shareholder rights at a scheduled board meeting within 60 days of receiving the document. Failure to invoke within that window would result in a reversion to the 2016 will, under which Devon received 35% of the shares and my father retained operational control. 60 days. The advisory board of Voss Industrial Supply met quarterly. The next meeting was in 6 weeks. 6 weeks, I said. 6 weeks, Arthur confirmed. He slid another document across the desk. I'd suggest you start preparing. I looked at the document, then at the USB still sitting in the box, then at Arthur Selig's calm, careful face. My father doesn't know this is coming. No. He thinks the company is Devon's. He does. I looked at the portrait of Werner Voss on the wall behind Arthur's desk. My grandfather. A man I'd known mostly from photographs and family stories. A man who'd built something from a 2-car garage and never let anyone tell him it couldn't be done. My grandmother had kept her eyes on Werner's company for 50 years. She'd watched her son inherit it. She'd watched him run it and grow it and forget who built it first. She'd watched him teach his children that only one of them was worth believing in. And then, quietly, systematically, with the precision she brought to everything, she'd made sure one of those children would have the power to change the story. I picked up the USB. I'll need the board's contact information, I said. And I'll need a copy of the original 1971 partnership agreement. Arthur allowed himself a small smile. The first one I'd seen from him. Your grandmother said to tell you, he said, opening his desk drawer and sliding another folder toward me, that you'd ask for exactly those 2 things. I want to stop here for a second, because I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be thinking the same thing I thought for the next 4 sleepless nights, which is, why not just accept a financial inheritance and leave it at that? Why walk into a boardroom and change everything? Why not take the quiet money and build a quiet life and stop trying to win a war that had been going on since childhood? Because my grandmother didn't hide those shares in the expectation that I'd cash them out and disappear. She hid them in the expectation that I'd use them the way she'd always used everything. To build something. To protect something. To see the water against the foundation before the damage was done. If this is the moment in the story where you're asking yourself what you would do, type inheritance in the comments and tell me. Would you walk into that room? Or would you take the money and the distance? Because the next part of this story is where it gets complicated. Where I stopped being just the dumb one and started being something else entirely. Keep watching. The first phone call I made was to Margaret Okafor. If Arthur Selig was the architect of my grandmother's plan, Margaret was the steel frame inside it. Margaret had been on the Voss Industries advisory board since 2001. She'd known my grandmother for decades before that. She was 67 years old, ran her own logistics consulting firm, and had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have survived boardrooms full of men who underestimated them. She picked up on the second ring. Cora Voss, she said before I could identify myself. I stopped. You knew I'd call. Ida told me you would, eventually. She said it might take you a while to trust yourself enough. A pause. She was right, wasn't she? Something in my chest cracked open a little. She was usually right. Yes. Margaret's voice softened, briefly, before it returned to its business register. I assume you've seen the document. I have. And you want to invoke. I do. Then you'll need 2 board members to co-sign the formal shareholder notification requesting a special session. I'm one. She paused. Martin Greer is another. He's been uncomfortable with Randall's management style for 3 years. He just needed someone to go first. Will he? I already called him this morning when I saw your name in my phone. A beat of silence. He'll sign. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why. It just suddenly seemed like the right altitude for the kind of overwhelmed that was moving through me. Margaret, can I ask you something? You can always ask. Why did she choose me? Why not Devon? He's been in the business for 10 years. He has the experience. By any standard metric. By any standard metric, Devon is more prepared. Margaret said crisply. Your grandmother knew that. She also knew that standard metrics are designed by people who benefit from them. Devon is good at running what already exists. You are good at seeing what shouldn't exist and what should. She paused. Ida built this company on that skill. She wanted to make sure it survived her. I pressed my back against the cabinet under my sink and looked at the ceiling of my kitchen. Okay, I said finally. Okay, let's do this. Devin found out 4 days before the board meeting. I know this because he showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening without calling first, which he had never done in his adult life. Devin was a man who scheduled things. The unannounced visit was itself a kind of signal. I opened the door. He was standing in the hallway in a gray jacket, hands in his pockets, looking exactly like our father except younger and without the specific hardness that 30 years of running a company gives a person. Cora, he said. Devin, I said, come in. We sat at my kitchen table. I made coffee neither of us touched. Outside, it was raining, one of those gray Ohio evenings in October when the sky and the pavement are the same color. Dad got the shareholder notification this afternoon. Devin said. I know, he called me for 2 hours. Devin looked at the table. He thinks it's a mistake. A clerical error. That Mom's attorney made a filing error on the original will and it's been corrected. That's not what it is. I know that. Devin was quiet for a moment. Is it real, Cora? 51%? It's real. Arthur Selig authenticated it. The court records confirm the date. Devin exhaled slowly. He didn't look furious, the way I'd expected. He looked something more complicated. Tired, maybe. Or unmoored in the way people look when a story they've been living turns out to have a different author. She never told me, he said. She never told any of us. That was the point. Dad is going to fight this. His eyes came up to mine. He's already called the company's legal team. He's saying undue influence, diminished capacity. He'll lose. The 2019 meeting minutes document her full cognitive engagement. Her attorney's notes are comprehensive. She was precise to the end. I kept my voice steady. He knows that. He's just hoping I'll back down if he makes it loud enough. Devin looked at me for a long moment. I couldn't entirely read his expression. We'd never been close the way siblings in books and movies are close. We'd been raised in the same house, attended the same family events, occupied the same family story, and been cast in such different roles that we'd never quite managed to see each other as real. Is this about proving something? He asked. I thought about it honestly. Not anymore. It was, maybe, once. But Grandma didn't leave this to me so I could prove something to Dad. She left it because she thought I could see things worth protecting, and you believe her. I didn't used to. I looked out at the rain. I'm starting to. Devin was quiet for a long time. I've been running operations for 3 years, he finally said. I know this company. I know the clients, the contracts, the supply chain. I know. I don't want to be enemies. Neither do I. He looked at me with something that might have been the beginning of respect, or might have been grief, or might have been both at once. What are you going to do when you're in that room? I'm going to tell the truth, I said. And then I'm going to let the board decide. He left 20 minutes later without the conversation reaching a resolution. Because some conversations don't resolve, they just find a place to rest. I sat at my kitchen table after he left and thought about Devin and me growing up in the same house on different planets, and about the specific tragedy of families who love each other badly. Then I opened my laptop and worked on my presentation until 2 a.m. October 19th, 2023. Voss Industries headquarters, Columbus, Ohio. I wore a blazer I actually owned. Navy from a sale at a department store, nothing that cost more than my rent, but mine. I carried a leather portfolio that matched nothing and everything about the life I'd been building quietly in the margins while everyone watched Devin. The conference room on the 4th floor of the Voss building was nothing like the Plaza Hotel Grand Ballroom. Drop ceiling, industrial carpet, a long table that had seen 15 years of quarterly meetings. The portraits on the walls weren't old Manhattan money. They were framed photographs of my grandfather's first warehouse. A handshake with original contractor in 1978, the original Voss letterhead. 9 advisory board members. My father at the head of the table, flanked by his CFO and the company attorney, Thomas Briggs, who I'd seen in that building my entire adult life, and who had the expression of a man walking into a controlled demolition. Devin sat to my father's right. He met my eyes briefly when I came in. No smile. No signal. Just acknowledgement. Margaret Okafor was already seated 3 chairs from the head. She looked at me with the calm of someone who had been waiting for this specific Thursday for 2 years. Martin Greer nodded once. I sat in the chair I'd been assigned at the far end of the table. The same end. Always the same end. Robert Yang, the board chair, a methodical man in his late 60s, called the meeting to order. This special session was called at the request of shareholders Margaret Okafor, Martin Greer, and Cora Voss. The matter concerns a testamentary document affecting ownership structure. He looked at me. Miss Voss, you have the floor. My father shifted in his chair. He didn't look at me. He was looking at Thomas Briggs. I stood. My hands were completely steady. I want to tell you they were shaking, because that would be the more compelling detail, but they weren't. The adrenaline I'd been carrying for 6 weeks had burned clean through to something on the other side of fear, something that felt like bedrock. Thank you, Mr. Yang. And thank you to the board for convening on short notice. My father raised his hand. Robert, before we allow this to proceed, I want the record to note that we have significant concerns about the validity of the document my daughter is about to present. He didn't look at me when he said my daughter. The phrase came out with the specific flatness of someone managing a crisis. We believe this document was produced under conditions that suggest undue influence and possible cognitive impairment. Mr. Voss. Robert Yang's voice carried the particular patient authority of someone who has chaired 1,000 arguments. You'll have opportunity to respond. Let's hear the presentation. My father sat back. I opened my portfolio. What I'm presenting today is the last will and testament of Ida Warner Voss, executed August 14, 2019, and authenticated by Arthur Selig of Selig & Associates, who has served as my grandmother's attorney for 27 years. I placed the document on the table and slid it toward Yang. Mr. Selig is available by phone to confirm authenticity. His statement has been submitted to the board in writing. I gave them a moment to look at it. This will supersede the 2016 document under which the board was notified of ownership distribution after my grandmother's passing. Under Ohio law, a subsequent valid will automatically revoke all prior testamentary instruments. I kept my voice level clinical, the voice of someone presenting facts, not feelings. The 2016 document was a draft my grandmother prepared in collaboration with her original estate attorney, who passed away in 2017. Following his death, she retained Arthur Selig and executed a revised will in August 2019. The timing. Thomas Briggs spoke for the first time. He had the voice of a man who'd been given a prepared script. August 2019 is notable. That is 5 months after the advisory board meeting in March 2019. It is, I said. And that is directly relevant. I reached into my portfolio and removed my phone. The March 2019 board meeting included a resolution proposed by Randall Voss, Resolution 2019-03, to reclassify Ida Voss's founding shares as non-voting, reducing her influence from 51% to 0. The stated rationale in the minutes was, and I'm quoting directly, that the founder is no longer capable of understanding modern business operations. Complete silence. My father's jaw tightened. My grandmother recorded that meeting. As an attending shareholder, she had that right. This recording, along with Arthur Selig's documentation of her cognitive engagement throughout 2019 and after, establishes conclusively that she was not experiencing diminished capacity when she executed this will. She was in fact responding specifically to a perceived threat to her legacy. I pressed play on the audio file. My father's voice filled the conference room. Not threatening, not cruel, but clear and businesslike and damning. Ida is 80 years old. She doesn't understand the direction we need to take this company. The most responsible course of action is to reclassify her holdings before she makes a decision that affects everyone here. The recording ended. The silence that followed had a texture to it. I looked at my father. He was looking at the table. The resolution failed, I said. 2 members voted against it, my grandmother and Margaret Okafor. My grandmother called Margaret that evening. She was not confused or impaired. She was clear-eyed about what had been attempted, and she responded by revising her estate documents to ensure that her legacy couldn't be altered after her death. Robert Yang removed his reading glasses and looked at me. Miss Voss, the document places 51% of founding shares in your possession with full voting rights. It does. You currently hold no formal leadership role in this company. That's accurate. I've worked in accounts payable for 9 years. A couple of board members exchanged glances. My father finally looked at me directly. Cora. His voice was controlled, careful. the voice he used in difficult client meetings. I understand what you think you're doing here, but you have to see how this looks. You have no operational experience. You've never been in a leadership position. Your grandmother loved you, but she was an 81-year-old woman making decisions under emotional circumstances that. She was making decisions under the circumstances you created, I said quietly. When you tried to remove her influence from the company she built, she made provisions to protect it. That's not emotional instability. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking that built Voss Industries in the first place. My father stopped. He looked at me with the specific expression of a man encountering a counter-argument he had no prepared response to. Devin, at his right, was very still. Mr. Yang, I continued, I'm not proposing to assume an operational role I'm not equipped for. I'm proposing that the board acknowledge the legal reality of this document and then make a decision about what is best for this company going forward. I have observations to share relevant to that decision. Yang looked at the document, at me, at the room. Let's hear them. I pulled the last papers from my portfolio. The spreadsheet I'd been maintaining, updated and printed, 3 years of quietly watching patterns nobody else was watching. Over the past 36 months, Voss Industries has lost 4 of its top 12 accounts by order volume. 2 have moved to competitors. 2 have significantly reduced engagements. The internal reporting doesn't flag this because overall revenue is up due to 2 large new clients acquired in 2022. But those new clients are in a sector with significant supply chain volatility, and our exposure to that sector has tripled in 18 months. I slid the spreadsheet to Yang. I have no operational authority. I had no access to the analytics software. I built this from the publicly available information and the conversations I could hear through the walls of the accounts payable office. I paused. I raised this not to criticize current leadership, but to demonstrate that the concerns my grandmother expressed about the company's future were based on patterns that are verifiable. Martin Greer leaned forward and studied the spreadsheet. Margaret Okafor looked at it and then looked at me, and for the first time I saw something in her expression beyond the controlled professionalism she'd shown all morning. It was something that looked like what Patricia Morales' message had looked like when I'd read it the first time. Recognition. The recess lasted 40 minutes. I sat in a glass-walled conference room down the hall with Arthur Selig, who had arrived in person at 9 a.m. and had been sitting quietly in the corner throughout the meeting, available and unobtrusive like a fact waiting to be checked. How are you doing? He asked. Ask me in 40 minutes. He nodded and returned to his notes. My father and Thomas Briggs were in the CEO's office at the end of the hall. I could see their shapes through the frosted glass, animated, alternating between talking and long silences. Devin came to find me during the recess. He knocked on the glass, came in when I waved. The sector concentration data, he said without preamble. Yes. I flagged it internally 8 months ago. His expression was complicated. Dad wanted to wait and see. I looked at my brother. Cora, that spreadsheet. He stopped. Started again. How long have you been tracking this? 3 years, from accounts payable. From what I could see from accounts payable, yes. He sat down across from me and put his elbows on the table. He looked like a person recalculating. Like someone who'd had a map he trusted and just discovered the coastline was in the wrong place. I'm sorry, he said. For Thanksgiving. For the town hall. For a lot of years of not. He stopped. For not seeing you. I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't. But I said I know, which was true, and which felt like enough for that particular room at that particular moment. When the board reconvened, Thomas Briggs attempted one more argument. This one more procedural than factual. Something about timing and filing deadlines that Arthur dismantled in 4 sentences. Robert Young called for the vote. The question on the table was whether to formally recognize the 2019 will as valid and binding under Ohio probate law. 7-2 in favor. My father voted against. Thomas Briggs wasn't eligible to vote. Devin abstained. The will is recognized. Yang said. Cora Marie Voss holds 51% of Voss Industries' founding shares effective immediately. He looked at my father. Randall, the board will schedule a formal transition session within 30 days. My father stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at me and I looked at him, and for one suspended moment it was just the 2 of us. Not the shareholders, not the board members, not the attorneys. Just a father and a daughter and 31 years of a story that had just been rewritten. He walked out. He didn't say anything. Somehow that was both worse and better than anything he could have said. I want to tell you what happened next, because it matters more than the boardroom. My father called me 2 weeks later. Not to argue, not to threaten, just to talk. He was in his car, I could tell from the background noise. He sounded like a man who'd put his anger down because it had become too heavy to carry. I didn't know she made a second will, he said. I know. She never told me she was unhappy with the arrangement. She told you in March 2019 when she voted against your resolution. I kept my voice gentle because I'd thought about this moment for weeks and gentle was what I decided on. You just didn't hear it as feedback. You heard it as obstruction. A long silence. I built this company, he said. For 30 years I built it. You grew it, I said. Grandma built it. And she built it by seeing patterns and protecting things worth protecting. I paused. I'm trying to do the same thing. Another silence. Your mother wants to have dinner, he said finally. I know. I'll call her this week. He hung up without saying goodbye. My father had always been a man who hung up before the difficult feeling arrived. I'd learned not to take it personally. I was still learning. My mother and I had dinner in November, 3 weeks after the board meeting. Italian place in Bexley, neutral territory, a bottle of wine between us that we both treated like a prop. Patricia Voss was 63 years old and had spent those years being the perfect executive's wife, which meant she'd gotten very good at adjusting the weather in any room she entered, managing the emotional climate so that my father could move through it comfortably. What she'd gotten less good at was noticing when that management had costs. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently, she said, not looking at me. When you were in school. When your father said things, I kept telling myself that challenging him would make it worse for you. Did you believe that? A pause. Sometimes. And sometimes I just didn't want the fight. I respected the honesty. It cost her something to say it, I could see that. My mother had always preferred the managed version of reality to the direct one. I don't need you to have been different then, I said carefully. But I need you to be different now. She nodded. Eyes bright. I'd like to have a real relationship with you, I said. Not the performance of one. Not Sunday dinners where we all pretend the last 30 years didn't happen. I mean the kind where you call me when something is actually wrong, and I do the same, and we're honest about what it is between us. I'd like that too, she said. And that was the beginning of something we're still building. Slowly, imperfectly, in the way things get built when the foundation needs to be cleared and relayed. In January 2024, I started my new role at Voss Industries. Not CEO, I wasn't ready for that, and neither was the company. Director of Strategic Risk Assessment, a title I suggested and the board approved. A role designed around exactly the skill set that had made me invisible for 9 years. Watching patterns. Flagging what doesn't add up. Seeing the water against the foundation. Devin remained as COO. It had been, I'll admit, the hardest negotiation of the transition. Not because Devin resisted, but because I wasn't sure I could trust my own instincts about whether I was doing the right thing or just being generous to someone who hadn't earned it. I called Margaret and asked her directly. Devin is a capable operator, she said. The company needs capable operators. You are a capable strategist. The company needs capable strategists. She paused. What it cannot afford is a family war playing out in the management structure. So I keep him. You keep him. And you build something together that neither of you could build alone. A pause. That was also Ida's plan, by the way. She was specific about it in a letter she left with me. A letter she'd left with Margaret. My grandmother had planned for this too. She really thought of everything, I said. She was precise to the end, Margaret said. It's where you get it from. I let that land. October 2024. 1 year after I walked into that conference room. I'm writing this from my home office in Columbus, in an apartment I can comfortably afford now, with a view of nothing particularly remarkable. Just a street and some trees, and the ordinary geography of a life I'm actually living. My salary as Director of Strategic Risk is $178,000, plus dividends from my shares. My accounts payable colleagues threw me a party when I was promoted. Sandra cried, which made me cry, and then we both laughed about it. My father and I have dinner once a month. We talk about the business, mostly, which is easier than talking about the years before. Sometimes we talk about Ida. He tells me things about her I didn't know. The early years, the risks she took, the deals that almost didn't work. He tells me these things like he's handing me something he should have given me before. Maybe he is. Devin and I have a meeting every Tuesday morning. Just the two of us. We bring our own coffee, we sit at his conference table, and we go through the things each of us sees that the other one might have missed. It is the most functional relationship I have in the building. Neither of us expected that. Miranda, I mean, Devin's wife, Kelsey, the one who asked if I was still in accounts payable, sent me a card last Christmas. Handwritten. It said, "I had you wrong. I'm glad I got to see I was wrong." That meant more than she probably knows. In the living room of my apartment, I've hung a photograph. It's from 1974, the year my grandmother started Werner's first contract. The year I dialed into the combination lock. She's standing outside a warehouse, 28 years old, squinting into the sun, hands on her hips, smiling the particular smile of someone who knows something is going to work. She looks like someone who sees patterns. She looks a little bit like me. I've been thinking about what my grandmother actually gave me. Not the shares, not the voting rights, not the title or the salary, or the apartment with a view of ordinary trees. Those things are real and I'm grateful for them, but they're not the inheritance. The inheritance is this. She saw me. Not the version of me my parents had decided on, not the deficit version, not the slow one, not the support person. She saw the actual thing, the pattern recognition, the visual thinking, the hyperlinks my mind makes between things that look unconnected, and she called it by its right name. She called it the skill that built this company. For 31 years, I'd been measuring myself by a standard I could never meet, one that was designed around a different kind of mind than mine. I'd accepted their version because I didn't have another one to offer. My grandmother offered one. She did it quietly over decades, in Sunday afternoon conversations and Thanksgiving kitchen moments, in a locked box with a combination set to the year she first proved what she was capable of. She was telling me the whole time to use my own measure. That's the thing about being seen by someone who refuses to use the wrong yardstick. It changes what you think measuring means. If you're watching this, and you've spent years being measured by someone else's standard, someone else's definition of potential and worth, and what success is supposed to look like, I want to tell you something my grandmother told me in a hospital parking lot when I was 11 years old and had just been described as a joy to have in class. She didn't say, "You're smarter than they think." She didn't say, "You'll prove them wrong someday." She didn't offer me the comfort of future revenge. She said, "You see what others miss." And then she went back to talking about the parking lot drainage. She was right. She'd been right for 20 years. The people who failed to see you are not the authority on your value. They are not the measuring instrument. They are just the people who are looking in the wrong direction. You don't need a secret will. You don't need a majority stake. You don't need an inheritance or a board vote or a legal document with a notary seal. You need what Ida gave me before the box, before the attorney, before any of it. You need one person who looks at the thing everyone calls your limitation and names it, correctly, as something else entirely. I've been that person for myself. Some days. Not every day, but more days than before. That's the arithmetic of healing, I think. Not all at once. Just more days than before, until the balance shifts, and you look back at the table where you were placed near the kitchen and realize you don't live there anymore. You built something better, and nobody can take that away from you. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of a room where your name came last or a table where you were placed behind the pillar, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment. Tell me your story. Because the most powerful thing about being seen is that it multiplies, and every comment below is someone who refused to stay invisible. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Share this with the person who needs it. And if you want more stories about ordinary people who were underestimated and then refused to stay that way, check the description. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Until next time.